Thank you, Shantila. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm glad you can make it today. Happy to start up teachings again. It's been almost 2 months since we've had teachings here. At Sarajya Monastery, our calendar has been very busy, and we've been away, we've been in Ganden Monastery and all these things. So we're happy to start again. We have 2 months of teachings scheduled for right now, and then we'll keep planning after that. So our plan for the Sunday morning teachings is, instead of having a specific text to follow, we want it to be open to everyone to come. So we have like general themes that we want to talk about, but we're interested in anyone, if they have things that they want to learn more about, to make requests to any of the center volunteers or to Shantila, and they'll let us know so we can try to arrange things in such a way that they'll be most helpful for people. So we want the Sunday morning teachings especially to be open to everyone, no matter of your level of experience or practice. So let's start by developing a strong motivation or set a strong intention. So no matter what we've been doing this morning, whatever running around we've had to do, having to deal with family and children and traffic, whatever it may be, we let that all go and allow ourselves to be present in the space, allow ourselves to recognize that by coming to a place where we want to study Dharma, whether that means coming here in person or just coming online, we're creating a sacred place for ourselves, a place that's outside of the ordinary. And so we can inhabit that sacred place from time, a place where we get to look at our minds, look at our practice, and develop our hearts in meaningful ways. And we realize that by coming together to engage in this study and practice, we don't do it simply for our own benefit. It's true that we benefit, that we'll find happiness and relaxation and peace in our lives as a result of our practice. But the goal is not for ourselves alone, but so that we might be able to benefit others. We want all of our actions to be motivated with the mind to wish to benefit others. And so today we come together to study the Holy Dharma, to learn how to practice, to learn how to meditate, not for our own benefit, so that we might develop the wisdom and the method and the tools that will allow us to be of greater service to other sentient beings. So let that be your motivation for joining today, the wish to benefit others. Have strong conviction in this. And to help set that motivation more firmly, we'll offer some prayers in the beginning. So offering prayers, one of the main reasons we offer prayers, and we do these kind of ritual prayers, is one, the prayers offer an opportunity for meditation, to do visualization and to engage in mental practice. But they also are a way for us to open our minds to receive the blessings of the lineage and of the teachers. So the prayers aren't just words, they offer an opportunity for us to reflect on the meaning that the prayers are describing, and also open our minds so that we might be more receptive to the teachings and to the practice. So the practice of offering prayer every day is very useful, even if it's something outside of your normal practice. It's good to do just because it helps open your mind. Lama Yeshe would always say that there are Buddhas all around us all the time, constantly trying to help us. But the problem is we aren't open to them, and that's not the Buddhist fault. It's because our habits and our imprints have closed us off in some ways. And one of the ways we can help open our minds to receive the blessings of our teachers and the lineage of the Buddha himself is by offering prayers and devotional praise. So we'll start in the Golden Prayer Book on page 34. We will offer, first we'll offer Refuge in Bodhicitta. We'll do that 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll offer the remaining prayers on these 2 pages in English. Sangye shiran soki chonam la jancho pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi rola penche sangye ju par shok Sangye shiran soki chonam la jancho pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi rola penche sangye ju par shok Sangye Chedam Soki Chonam La Janjo Baru Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pesonam Gi Chola Pinche Sangye Dru Par Sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. For my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. And so now we'll offer the mandala. And so when you offer a mandala, what you're offering is the entire world system that you visualize. And you're offering it to the gurus and to the Buddhas. And in this case, we'll do the short mandala offering. There's actually the longer mandala offering. It's called the offering of 37 heaps because it has 37 different visualizations. And there's a wonderful commentary on it by Miltra Dhammavarga that Venerable Namjong translated recently. And I edited it for him, but he has not followed up with the edits. So at some point, it's been requested by the committee that he translated. So eventually that'll be available for those that want to do the full mandala offering. But so when we do an offering, a mandala offering, there are different purposes to do it. One is to request the blessings of the teacher or the guru. And the other is to make an offering to request teachings. And so in this case, we do both. And so it doesn't have to be that you look at me as the guru, but you recognize that as the person who is the Dharma instructor in the center, that I am hopefully doing the work of the Buddha or his emissary in some way to bring these teachings to you. So you don't have to actually see the person as your guru in order to make an offering to them in this way, but it's requesting the blessings and the teachings of all the lamas and of the Buddha. So we make an offering of the whole world and of all the world systems. Sangye Shingdo Me Wai Jo Namanda Shinha ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field, and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Yedam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnayatayami. Continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate and make offerings and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime, pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects. With supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the ways of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. We started a little late, so I think we'll end there. Do a comparison of the time. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. We are calling this series of teachings How to Be Happy, Practical Buddhism for Everyday Life, right? That is our kind of the title. And if that's where we're starting, I think the important question is, what do we mean by happy? What does it mean to be happy? When you say I am happy, what do you mean by that? What is, and I think I want you to think about your answers. What if I ask you, what makes you happy? What is your first instinctual answer? And then, since you're in a Dharma center, what do you think is the proper Dharma answer? And are those the same thing? And I know for a lot of us, they won't be the same thing. I can say for me, my first instinct are still very worldly, right? And so I know what should make me happy as a Dharma practitioner, but I also know that I like, ice cream, things like this. So what do I mean when I say we want to be happy? I think that's an important question. We spend our life looking for happiness for ourselves and for others. But if we don't really understand what we mean by happiness, how can we ever find it? Right? And when we grab onto pleasant experiences as if they are the cause of our actual happiness, then what does that mean for our happiness? That happiness always has to be fleeting, that it always has to be dependent on circumstances outside of our control, if that's what we grab onto as happiness. So I want to think, what does it mean to be happy? What do you think? Does anyone have a suggestion? It doesn't have to be wrong. Excuse me, it won't be wrong. There's no wrong answer. I just want to know, if I say, what makes you happy, Shantila? What makes you happy?
Having no stress,
Having no stress. Okay. Anyone else? Mm. Be free of turbulence. Okay.
So when you asked, my first thought definition of being like being free from suffering in the sense of unpleasant experiences. But when I then checked in my mind, I realized that's actually not true because like there's so many things that I actually really need to be experiencing to actually be feeling happy. So it's
Mm.
not like just freedom from, but it's also receiving or experiencing certain things without which now with my current level of attachment, I'm definitely not like I'm actually suffering without them.
Mm. Mm.
Having a doubt.
Mm. Being free from doubts. So, yeah, go ahead. Being free from that. So notice that everything we mentioned, right, is being free from something. It's a very kind of a negative psychology, right? Are there any positive attributes to being happy? Because being free from something, there's nothing you can cultivate, right, except for the freedom from that. I think most of what causes our unhappiness is, one second, let me take a step back. We can also think of very simple things that make us happy, and it's okay. The feeling of taking a nice cool bath or a cool shower on a hot day, that is a pleasant sensation, right? That's a type of happiness. It's worldly happiness. It's not permanent happiness. But we don't have to say, well, this isn't going to make me happy. We don't have to, as people who are seeking out a spiritual life, say that worldly happiness is only going to be painful or not useful, right? We have to shun it. We have to beat ourselves with whips. That's not the case. We just have to recognize that that happiness is a worldly happiness that is impermanent. So when it comes, we can appreciate it and say, this is a very nice experience. This isn't real happiness, but it's a taste of what happiness could be, right? That sensation is one I want to cultivate all the time. I don't want it to be dependent upon external circumstances, right? We say the feeling of jumping into a cool lake during a hot day, which we might experience as happiness, is really a type of suffering, right? We call it the suffering of change, where you're exchanging one suffering, the suffering of heat, for the suffering of coldness. But at that moment of transition, you experience it as happiness because it's something different, right? So in our minds, we recognize, okay, this isn't real happiness. It's actually a type of suffering. It's the nature of samsara, but it's something that feels pleasurable to me. So I can rejoice in that and say, this is something I want to feel all the time. So then what can I cultivate in my life? And I'm always feeling pleasurable things without relying upon the external circumstances. Because it's the emotion that's more important, right? But so we don't have to eschew all worldly happiness and say there's no point to it. Because the usefulness of worldly happiness is that it gives us a taste of what real happiness could be. The danger is that when we grab onto worldly happiness as if it were real happiness, that's the danger. Okay, but we can still appreciate it. There's so many difficulties in life. Whenever we can find an opportunity to have any sort of happiness, we shouldn't run away from it. You know, especially now, our lives are filled with anxiety and difficulties. At least I know, with the current political climate, it seems like everything is anxious all the time. So I think this idea of a negative psychology of happiness is interesting, and it is an important one. We say that a sense of happiness is really a sense of being free from anxiety, being free from stress, being aware of our circumstances, and having no doubt about what's going on in our life, right? So when we can be free of those things, then as a result, happiness is the absence of strife in our life. So I think that's true. But I think in addition to, yeah.
Actually, real happiness, I would think.
No, that's correct. You're right. That is a sensorial pleasure, right? That is not happiness. But that's
You can be really
that is true, right? That's the point of understanding that is actually a type of suffering. Is to be able to get to that level. But what I'm saying, so that's correct. The things I mentioned, those examples of worldly happiness, aren't real happiness. They're just pleasurable sensations. But they can be useful to us to realize that these pleasurable sensations aren't things we have to run away from, right? We don't have to say that these are bad and real happiness is the only thing we should be seeking out. We can experience pleasurable sensations and appreciate them without grasping onto them as if they're real happiness. So you're correct in saying that those things aren't happiness, but they point towards what happiness would be, because that pleasurable sensation is what we're trying to cultivate when we have real happiness. But a pleasant sensation that comes from our mind all the time, it isn't due to any sort of external factor, right? But you're correct; those aren't happiness. They're just useful. My point is that sometimes, in my experience, when people learn about, when you say things like those are types of suffering, and what real happiness comes from the inside, they think that anything that is like conventionally or worldly pleasurable, they have to get rid of it out of their life, and that they have to be like, you know, a penitent person all the time, like a renunciant or like a pure ascetic. And for some people, that's useful, but that's not the only way to live as a spiritual person. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a matter of finding a balance. But as long as you define that chocolate cake as happiness, then it's not, you're never going to be happy, right? And as you realize that I can get a pleasurable sensation from these worldly things, and when it comes, I appreciate it, but I don't arrange my life around those things, right? But they're useful for us because they at least give us a taste of what that could be, you know? They say, like, I had a teacher once, or I went to a teacher once, and someone asked what it was like to be a Buddha, and he's like 24-hour party. Like, that's what it is, you know? We say the only state of permanent bliss is being a Buddha, right? That's what it means. But there's no other real easy language for us as suffering sentient beings to describe the status of being a Buddha. We have intellectual language to explain it, but it's hard to have any sort of insight into what that experience is because our experience is so far away from it. But when you have a sense or a sensation of being content, of strong contentment, regardless of the ups and downs or the vicissitudes of life, that is pointing towards what it's like to be a Buddha that lives in perpetual bliss. I think one of the things we're getting at, though, when we talk about happiness and we think of happiness as a type of contentment, that it comes when we are free from stress or anxiety, is that suggests that our natural state is one of a level of contentment. And we bring anxiety and stress to disturb our natural state, right? That we have as our innate capacity, one of being calm, level, and easy. And it's only when we allow the outside world to disrupt our mind that then that natural state gets disturbed. So when we seek out happiness or contentment, as we may call it, I think contentment is usually a more useful thing to be seeking out than happiness because it's less, it's less unstable. Thank you. When we're seeking that out, what we're trying to do is remember that we have that capacity already. It doesn't mean we have to find things outside of ourselves. It's there. We have to get rid of the things that we have put on top of it to get in the way of us understanding it, right? So our happiness is always available to us.
So, a very basic question. How do we know? I mean, the Buddha tells us, and so we are willing to go along that our basic nature is contentment and peace and all the good things. And the others are all anxiety and all are just afflictions. But that's not what, say, modern psychology says, right? Modern psychology doesn't tell you that, like they say, yes, of course, things will bother you, and then you have to work at letting them not bother you. So how do we, so we just take it at face value, is it? I mean, we just take it as a, obviously he's experienced that and others I'm sure have, and so you just believe it. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think that if you hear someone say something to that extent, that you already have this capacity to be content and happy and at peace, and it's only outside things that are causing your mind to be disturbed, and your mind is what's causing your disruption. If that isn't your immediate experience, then at first, yes, you just have to accept that people that have had this experience are saying it. But the reason for accepting that is then you can investigate it, right? You do the work, you meditate, and you look at what is causing my unhappiness, what is disturbing my mind. Is it really external phenomena, or is it something going on in me? So at first, maybe you have to have a little bit of confidence. Okay, I trust this person understands the teachings of the Buddha, that they're explaining it in a way that is resonant or concordant with what the Buddha meant, and they have insight more than I do. So at first, you have to have a little bit of confidence there. But that isn't to say you have to survive that blind faith. That confidence inspires you to practice and look at your own experience, right? And in my experience, I know that it's through my meditation that I've come to understand the validity of the claims of the Buddha in this regard, right? That my happiness, my greatest happiness doesn't come when people give me things or when I have things when I'm praised or when I'm complimented. My happiness comes in the moments where I'm able to see my practice develop in such a way that there are obstacles that don't cause me to get upset. And when I notice those mile markers in my practice, that's when I find happiness and contentment, right? But that comes from my own experience. So sometimes at first, especially if your experience is very far away from it, then there's a little bit of confidence or faith you have to have. But that is never going to sustain your whole practice. If your whole practice is based on blind faith, then you don't have any experiential understanding. That's not going to help you, or not in the long run. It might help you in the short term, but you need to have your own experience to have long-term transformation. Because part of practicing Buddhism, and really part of practicing any spiritual path, is transformation. It's inner transformation is what we're trying to do, right? But what Buddhism says is that transformation depends on you. There's no outside entity, no God, no being, no supernatural power that is going to transform you. You have to transform, right? And all that the Buddhists can do, and all that our teachers can do, is give us the tools and the techniques and the insight to learn how to transform ourselves. If the Buddha could make us all happy, he would, right? If our teachers could just bless us and give us happiness, they would, but they can't. What they can do is they can show us how to do it. So at first, there's a little bit of faith needed, but your own personal experience is where it should come from. But thinking about happiness, and this happiness as the idea of a negative psychology type thing, but just really going back to the way you said, I think one of the contemporary, especially trauma-informed care, is one of the more contemporary avenues of contemporary psychology and psychotherapy. And trauma-informed care doesn't ask what is wrong with you, but it asks what happened to you, right? Because it's looking at the fact that our experiences of the world are due to things that happen to us, right? And this is from a Western psychology point of view. And so I think that lines up with Buddhist ideas insofar as what has happened to us has caused our minds to be upset, right? So they have disturbed our natural way of being. The difficulty and the separation from Western psychology and Buddhist psychology is that we look at those external factors, whether they be other people or events or situations, and say, yes, the external environment does play a part in our emotional well-being, but ultimately we're in full control of it. So that is a factor, that is a condition. There are certain circumstances where it's much easier to be happy and content than others, right? When everything is going your way, it's much easier to feel contentment than when everything is going against you. But the truth is, the external conditions are only the catalyst. It's really the internal practice that's causing happiness or discontent, suffering or joy. So that's a little bit of a disconnect from Western psychology, that we do acknowledge things happen to us that cause certain emotional responses, but we're still in control of those emotional responses. The important thing for me, if we're talking about happiness, is that I want to know, okay, right now I'm not happy all the time, or I'm not content all the time. I try to be and I practice it, but I still have discontent, I still have anxiety, I still have fear. What would my life be like if I did have perpetual happiness or contentment? How would that change my experiences of the world? I think that's an important question, because we say I'm seeking happiness and calm and contentment, but why? Right? What are we actually seeking? How is my life going to be transformed if I'm able to have a calm mind all the time that is always bringing me contentment? It's worth asking ourselves this, because if we don't know what we're aiming for, how can we find the right way to get there, right? If my idea of happiness is that I'm always going to have these pleasurable experiences, like we're saying, then that's not a realistic goal, because our lives aren't filled with pleasurable experiences all the time. We undergo difficult circumstances. So what is the goal of me having happiness all the time? But how do I expect my life to be different? I'm sorry? Answer one more time. Equanimity. So equanimity is a goal that is not the same as contentment, but equanimity is a type of mind that leads to contentment. But then again, so I guess the question is, so say I've developed the mind of equanimity, right? And equanimity is usually in response to other beings, where I hold other beings in the same regard, whether they're beings that want to hurt me or beings that want to help me, whether they're beings I label as a friend or enemy or stranger, I have the same level of love and compassion and regard for them. If I'm able to develop that mind of equanimity, how does that change my life? If that's what I'm asking.
I think the external circumstances would not affect you. You'll be kind of blah, like whatever happens.
Well, that's the idea, right? Is so if we're able to develop equanimity or contentment or even a stronger grasp of happiness, then we can say that, we say right now happiness is the absence, or one of the types of describing happiness is the absence of stress or anxiety or doubt. But if I develop contentment, then no matter the external circumstances, even when they're complicated, my mind won't fall down into the doldrums, right? And so it's not saying that I'm always going to be blissful and like walking on the clouds, but it's saying that I'm going to be stable. And that when I have difficulty arise, I'm able to navigate it in a healthy way, that I'm able to keep my mind content and stable and strong, even in the face of difficult situations. And I think that's important because right now, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think a lot of us, there's a lot of anxiety in the world right now. I think due to the political situation, especially in the US, which granted the US is thousands and thousands of miles away, but they kind of set the tone for a lot of international relationships. And so a lot of people are anxious right now. And, I had a very good friend of mine who is a priest. He is an Episcopalian priest. He's been a priest 4 decades, maybe 5 decades. No, not 5, 4 decades. So he's, a spiritual leader, member of the clergy for a long time. And he sent me a message the other day and he said, look, and when I was in Boston, he would come to our Dharma center because he's especially like studying Lojong, my training, and how to get rid of the ego and the Buddhist ideas of it. And he became very enamored of Tsongkhapa and Tsongkhapa's teachings and the Kadampa Geshes. So we'd have classes, just him and I. And he's like, look, I know what you're going to say, but what would Tsongkhapa do right now? Like he's living in the US. He's like, what would Tsongkhapa say? Like, how do I deal with this right now? Because everything is surreal. Like nothing feels real right now in the US. The political turmoil is so great. What would Tsongkhapa do? That was his question to me. And I said, you've been a priest for 40 years. You should have answers to these things. And he was like, yeah, but anyway, well, give me an answer. And I said, okay, well.
So what was your answer?
I was going to talk about it later. You're jumping to the end of my class.
Yes.
I know. I think the answer is that, especially for someone who wants to affect change in the world, before we can do anything to affect external change, we have to have a basis of internal change, right? So we have to do the internal work that creates a stability of our mind that can look at people who are causing harm, whether it be politicians or others, and not have hatred towards them, not have anger to them, can find a mind of equanimity and contentment, and then from that basis, decide what kind of external actions I can take that will be a benefit, right? Because Buddhism isn't about doing nothing, right? Buddhism is a radical way of transforming your mind. So it's not staying silent in the face of oppression, but just blindly going about protesting or engaging in civil disobedience also isn't useful. You have to use wisdom and method together. So method is compassion, right? Wisdom is understanding the nature of reality. In order for us to be meaningful in the world, we have to combine those two. But in order to combine them, we have to have a stable mind first. So we have to do the inner work, which will then give us a basis to do outer work. And that also comes with knowing yourself. Like I know that I am not an organizer. I know that what my skill set is very limited. So if I'm trying to do something in the US to help others, there are certain things that I'm good at and certain things I'm not good at. But I have to be aware of my own mind in order to know how can I be useful, right? Because you can feel useless. Like, what can I do in the face of this level of injustice that's going on so many levels above my head? And you say, okay, well, what small things can I do that I'm not doing them for my own ego? I'm doing them because they are suffering sentient beings, and I have the capacity to help them in some small way. And the only way to realize that is to find an inner basis that's stable, right? So first we do the inner work, and then from the inner work, we determine what kind of outer work we can do. And that is going to change depending on who we are, what our skill sets are, what our conditions are. What if you're someone who's, there are communities in America who are under attack right now. They don't have the means to engage in that external work because they're defending themselves. But if I come from a place of privilege as a white male who doesn't have the same level of vitriol aimed at me, then how can I use that privilege to help others that don't have it, right? So everyone's circumstances are different. So it's not a one size fits all in the external work. Internal work is the same for everyone. Is make sure your mind is calm, make sure your mind isn't acting out of anger, isn't acting out of desire or ignorance, and that you're reacting with wisdom combined with your emotional response. we'll get there. That was my response. But the point is, everyone's feeling anxious right now, right? And so it's hard to feel contentment or hard to develop contentment when we are anxious.
I
So-
think it's important not to give in to too much of that gloomy thing and all that. Then I would prefer
It is. It's important not to give in to
not to
gloom.
give up hope. Keep going, yeah.
Yeah, to not give up hope and to keep going. But at the same time, I have some friends whose response is, I'm just not going to watch the news and I'm going to ignore it because it makes me depressed when I watch the news. And I said, well, you have the privilege of not being in a group of people who are being constantly attacked. Like I have friends whose passports were taken away because they're trans and their passport didn't match with the biological sex they were assigned at birth. So their passport was taken away when they tried to get it updated. I'm like, you're not part of that group, so you don't have to worry about it. So you can pretend it doesn't matter. So saying that I'm going to ignore the world because I don't want to be unhappy, I don't think is a useful response, right? Because it's trying to pretend you exist in a reality that isn't real. So I think we need to be able to look at the difficult circumstances, but as Shanti says, still have hope. To say everything is gloomy all the time and there's no point in doing anything, that's a defeatist attitude that isn't helping. So we have to be realistic about what's going on, but then say, what can I do to make sure my mind is strong and stable? Because if I'm unhappy all the time and I'm distressed, how can I be serving others? How can I be in a position of strength to help others if I have no mental stability, right? If I'm anxious all the time. And so, just as we started by saying, what is happiness? I think it's really important we ask ourselves, what do we mean when I say I want to be happy? I also think it's important to ask, what do I mean when I say I'm anxious, or I experience anxiety or stress? What do we mean by these things? And I will say there are some people that have obviously chemical imbalances and anxiety disorders, and there's different ways of navigating that. So if you have a very strong social anxiety disorder, I'm not saying this, then there's other psychological help you can get outside of this, right? Or if you have depression or bipolar disorder, you can't meditate all these things away, at least not at our beginning level of practice. So I'm not saying there's definitely a place for psychology and psychotherapy and even pharmaceutical intervention for some people. So I'm not saying don't do that. This is not the purview of what we're talking about here. But so I think it's important to understand, what do we mean when I say I have anxiety? And then identify, does that anxiety come from external sources or internal sources? And the same goes for stress. And I think the truth is, what we'll find is that our anxiety, our stress, whatever we want to call it, it's all from internal sources. External sources are the precipitating factors. The world being in constant disarray is making it very easy to be stressed all the time, very easy to be anxious. But that anxiety comes from within us. We are allowing it, we are feeding it, right? Instinctively, that's our instinct, is to continue in samsara.
Someone who doesn't feel anxiety, as in someone who's a highly evolved person, so he would look at today's political turmoil and feel what?
Sad,
For whom?
for all sentient beings that are suffering.
So including the
Oh, of course. I mean, that's the difficulty, right? When you're thinking about the irony is that when you look at the people that are causing so much harm, the harm they're causing themselves, at least from a Buddhist perspective, is way greater than the harm they're causing to others. Because, and this comes about when you do mind training practice, the harm any other enemy, external enemy can do to you, the worst they can do is take your life. But the harm they're doing, the internal enemy, acting out of anger or acting out of pride or ignorance, causing harm to others, is creating countless lifetimes of pain and misery for yourselves. So if you look at politicians who are engaging in these really abusive, awful tactics and creating hostile environments, they're creating negative karma that is going to cause them to suffer for lifetimes. Whereas the worst they're doing to us in this life, the worst they can do is deprive us of our life. But since our limited experience is so small, we think depriving me of my life right now is the worst possible outcome. Therefore, it feels like the whole world is my one lifetime experience. So in our it's hard to shake that, right? And it's hard to shake that because that's our experience in this life. But so in our meditation, we realize that the way that the strongest antidote is to develop compassion towards the people that are your aggressors, to realize they're causing suffering to themselves as well. And the reason they're doing that, the reason they're acting the way they are is because they're suffering, right? And they want to be happy, and they don't know the distinction between happiness and suffering. the reason Trump thinks that America should own Greenland and Canada is because he thinks that if he expands the territorial US, then he'll have some ego boost that says like he was a president that made America bigger. And that's what is important to him. He thinks that longevity, that like being written in the history books is what happiness is, right? And we say, well, that's foolish, that's ridiculous. But for him, being able to be someone who's known for like that pride and that ego, he thinks it's happiness. So he goes about all these harmful actions because he thinks he's seeking out happiness, right? So he has a fundamental, at least I don't know his mind, but observing the actions from the outside, it seems to be a fundamental ignorance about the nature of what is happiness and what is suffering. And so when you see someone like that, you have to do two things simultaneously. One, realize they're suffering, have compassion for them, and wish they weren't suffering. But that doesn't mean don't engage in necessary actions to help prevent their harm if you are able to, right? So recognizing that people are causing harm and are causing suffering, and you have to have compassion for them, doesn't mean you have to just sit back and take it. If you have a way to engage in a healthy resistance to it, then you should, right? It isn't about being passive, about letting things happen to you, but it is making sure that whatever actions you take are motivated by love and compassion and not motivated by your own frustration or your own anxiety or your own hostility. Right? So I think it's important to understand what we mean. I think all of us have this feeling of anxiety, this feeling of helplessness. And so it's useful to look at the external factors that trigger that in us, but more useful is to say, well, I have these external factors. What are they triggering in me, right? And so, for instance, sort of kind of cut it down to because I'm talking too long. What it comes down to, I think, is combination of our self-grasping and our self-cherishing minds that are what causing our anxiety and our stress. And our seeking out of the 8 worldly dharmas is what's causing our anxiety and stress.
Sorry.
The 8 worldly dharmas. So the 8 worldly dharmas being these 4 pairs of things that are the motivations for almost everything we do, right? 4 things that we are seeking out and 4 things we're trying to avoid. So whenever we engage in an action that is motivated by seeking out our own pleasure or seeking to avoid discomfort or seeking out gain or profit and trying to avoid loss, seeking out praise or compliments, trying to avoid criticism, and seeking out popularity and trying to avoid infamy or a bad reputation. So those are called the 8 worldly dharmas, right? And they are like the missionaries of the self-cherishing mind. I think most of our anxiety comes when we have external circumstances that are butting against one of our 8 worldly dharmas, right? If my life is centered around seeking out pleasure and or avoiding discomfort, then when someone does something that makes that more difficult for me, that causes me stress, right? If my reputation is important to me and there are other people saying bad things about me, then that causes me stress and anxiety, right? But what's happening is it's my worldly concerns that are causing me stress and anxiety. And whatever external things are happening are just the external conditions that my own self-cherishing mind is grabbing onto, right?
May I comment to that, please? You just may I comment?
Yeah.
Like it's not really a question, but I just through what you're saying realize like I'm definitely among the people who naturally would navigate to having a lot of aversion to Mr. Trump and Musk and the assembly. And I did think already before, oh my God, there's so much that it's so obvious that there's so much rain. It's like yearning for exactly being praised, avoiding being disliked, criticized, and so on. But I just realized now, to what you're saying, that in a way, they are showing us of what our own trajectory, right? If you continue harboring like when deeper and deeper the attachments to the dharmas, which you see yourself, so Dharma is also MNR, the budget and all that. You would be doing exactly the same things most likely. Because our mind is equally out of control or on track to being equally out of control if you just continue harboring those tendencies.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to recognize is that the distinction and the difference between, myself and someone in the government right now who's engaging in these awful things isn't that big. The resources I have available to me are widely different, and therefore my external actions are different. But like the amount of work I've done to control my mind over the last couple of decades has made me different than they presumably are. I don't know, but it's not huge, right? And it's easy if you don't continue practicing to fall back into that mind because their mind, the afflicted minds that are controlling their actions are afflicted minds I've had and I still have, just to a lesser degree, hypothetically, than they have right now. And that's due to my practice. So yeah, it's a good thing to point out because we don't want to say that they're totally different than me, right? The enemy, quote unquote enemy, whatever as that label, is totally separate from me. I can never be that. That's a foolish thing to believe, right? It's only a matter of degree that is different. We all have hatred and desire and ignorance. Those are the three root poisons that cause us to keep cycling in samsara over and over again. They're just different degrees, and we hopefully are cultivating ways to lessen them and to fill them with love and compassion and wisdom in their place. And then we act out of compassion and wisdom instead. And so when we're able to recognize that our anxiety, yes, it is external things that are triggering it quite often, but look at what is actually being triggered. How our self-cherishing mind is what's causing the majority of our distress. In the mind training teachings, they say the self-cherishing mind is the cause of all of our suffering, is the way they describe it. So if we can recognize that, then we can develop practices and plans to have both short-term benefit and long-term benefit to our lives through our practice. How to avoid stress and anxiety in the short term and the long term, right? And the good thing is it's the same practice, right? The short-term practice becomes long-term practice the more you do it. So you're setting yourself up for success. But you can find different techniques. There are some techniques that are good, like when you meditate in the evening every day on the 8 worldly concerns or something, or self-cherishing or compassion or love, anything like this. What you're doing in that meditation is making your mind familiar with those virtuous minds and making your mind recognize the non-virtuous minds so you can avoid them. But that is something you're slowly making your mind accustomed to, right? To meditate on something is to become familiar with it, to understand it. So that's a long-term practice. Doing compassionate meditation every day is a long-term practice. And then we have to also develop practices that we can do in the moment. So when we've developed, we see ourselves under the control of our self-cherishing mind. What can we do right now to help eliminate that mind in this moment? When I'm in the midst of a panic attack, what can I do to be free from that in this moment? And then do something else long-term. So we have to develop strategies for both those things. And luckily, Buddhism gives us tools to do that. And at the heart of those tools, at the heart of those tools is having a level of mindfulness or awareness of our own emotional states. Right? And that mindfulness and awareness has to be coupled with wisdom. So we have to do the work to allow our minds to settle so we can actually observe what's going on. So we can observe when I feel happy, what are the external circumstances that are bringing that about? When I feel anxious or stressed or frustrated, what are the external circumstances bringing that about? That requires a level of mindfulness, of contemplation, of being able to settle all of the distractions to actually look at the root of the matter. What is going on, right? So we have to develop the mindfulness that can let us see what is causing those things. But then we have to develop mind that is investigating those things as well. That mindfulness enough, that awareness enough isn't good enough. It's necessary, it's critical, because we don't have that mindfulness. We're just being, overwhelmed by external sources. We have to have that mindfulness, but then we have to be able to investigate it and say, what is causing this? And how am I reacting? And is my reacting benefiting me? Is this emotional reaction benefiting me and benefiting others? And so that involves investigation. So mindfulness and awareness of our emotional states has to be combined with wisdom of recognizing what is causing those emotional states and what is resulting from those emotional states. And so there are a number of practices we can do to develop those. And what I thought we'd do, okay, I'll talk a little bit more before our meditation. Actually, I'm just trying to, we'll have a chance to meditate together and trying to balance me speaking more slowly than I anticipated. I think what is telling in our lives when we look at how under the control of the self-correction mind we are, is that we can say very easily, I want to be calm, I want to have contentment, I want to have a stress-free life. And yet we seek out drama and excitement all the time. And I mean, look at contemporary television. How much of it is, especially reality TV, is about people being awful to each other and us consuming that as entertainment, right? And I don't mean any of us individually, but I just mean us as a culture, right? I don't know what you consume as entertainment. But as a culture, we look for drama and excitement. And we say that is what is exciting and fun to me. So we fill our lives with people acting in horrible ways and saying, this is what I'm excited by. So we say we want to be calm, we want to be content, and yet we seek out the opposite of that in our entertainment. Okay? I'm sorry?
They're not the same people.
You don't think any Dharma practitioner watches reality TV?
They're the same one.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't even know what reality TV is. The descriptions are correct.
I think you're a very lucky person and much farther along the path than a lot of us.
Yeah, I don't. Actually.
Well, I mean, that's a very good thing, right? But I think in general, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I rejoice in that. I think in general, though, we seek out excitement. There are, but this is, I mean, right now, if we look at entertainment business, it's a multi-billion-dollar business that obviously is affecting a lot of people. The people are drawn to drama, right? And to excitement. And part of the reason is you feel better about yourself when you see other people behaving badly. You say, well, at least I'm not them. So other people's drama becomes a chance for you to feel good about yourself. A little bit, you know, but it's really just your ego. It's really just your ego saying, look at how bad they are, and it's not me, right? But we seek out, and again, I use a royal we here, we as a human race, not necessarily every individual. What we seek out for entertainment can be really disruptive, but that's our instinct, is to look for excitement, right? Why do we search for excitement? Never mind reality TV, like why do we go on roller coasters? Why do people want to skydive? Why do we do things that cause adrenaline? Like, you know, and there's a physio and biological response, yes, like adrenaline and epinephrine and all these other chemicals causing our sense pleasures to light up. That's true. But why do we seek that out? Like, why is that something that's attractive to us? And on the flip side of that, why do we look at our spiritual practice? And again, this may not be true for those of us in this room, but it's generally true for society. Why do we look at our spiritual practice as something that's boring? You know, why do we say, well, I could be meditating or I could be going out for, you know, a drink with my friends. So I'm going to choose being out with my friends instead of meditating because meditating is more boring or less exciting. Or I could, you know, go to the Dharma Center for teachings, but, you know, I have other things that are more important to do. So I'm going to do those things instead. What do we prioritize in our lives? And what is our motivation for that prioritization? You know, we want to be free of stress, but we seek out excitement. And I mean, we all do that to different levels and different extent. Maybe the more we've practiced, whether in this life or in past lives, it may be less of a draw to us. And I think that's especially true for many of us as we get older and we have more experience realizing these things aren't causing happiness, that it's easier to let them go, right? I know that's definitely true for me, that the more I've experienced these things and realized this is not additive to my life, then letting them go becomes very natural, right? So that's true for a lot of us. But yeah.
Can I ask a question related to the entertainment options? So if it's something that on a not very skilled level, we use it as a numbing technique. Like if I have way too much going on, then while I'm doing my chores and I'm at home, I put Netflix on my tablet and I get it with me while I'm doing the chores. And so in this specific example, I would do a lot of true crime, for example, which is I would say a little bit less horrible than reality TV, but
I mean, true crime has actual people that are suffering.
Yeah, it's not, it's very
Like it's taking the actual suffering of living beings or people that have been murdered and saying this is our entertainment. But I understand your point.
But no, my question was, if I wanted to replace that with something that's less harmful or less, it still has the function of some numbing for now until I develop my faculties to the degree that I don't need it numbing. What could I use for that? That's less
Yeah.
damaging.
So I think as people that are engaging in spiritual practice, we don't have to avoid entertainment. I think we have to engage and consume entertainment in a mindful way that says this is being part of my practice and not something that I'm using to numb myself. So I think relying on entertainment, whether it be film or TV or music, as a numbing capacity is a not healthy way to go about it, regardless of the specific content. Because that numbing is encouraging us to be mindless, right? It's encouraging a type of mindlessness. And so engaging and consuming it, and I know like a lot of times you have a long day. I used to do this all the time. I used to work when I was after I finished undergrad, before I started grad school, I worked for a year as a theater electrician at my university. And we'd do gigs where we would work until like 2, 3 in the morning, right? Doing at the end of a show, you have to like, it's called strike, you get rid of everything. So you're exhausted. You've been doing all this physical labor and it's the end of a show. So everything adds up. So you're tired and you get home at 2 in the morning, but you can't go to sleep because you're just wired, right? You've been working. So you need to do something to relax. So you throw on something on TV. Like that's a habit we have, right? I don't think that's a healthy way to engage in it. I think we can engage in entertainment in such a way that it allows us to investigate our emotions, our reactions to that entertainment, and it allows us an opportunity to see how we react. So I don't watch as much TV these days, but I do read quite a lot. And I'm not reading only Dharma books. Right now I'm reading a book by Dan Simmons called The Fall of Hyperion, and I'm reading a book by Octavia Butler called Adulthood Rights, which are both like weird sci-fi novels, right? Like contemporary sci-fi. They're not, well, they are very contemplative, but they're not designed as spiritual practice, right? They're designed as fiction, as pop fiction. But the way I engage, hopefully, ideally, is a way that allows me to engage in a spiritual practice by using that as entertainment. But if the entertainment is numbing us, then I think that it's encouraging mindlessness. So in that case, I think, for instance, many people do, right? Many people have TV shows they watch over and over again, and they put it on while they're doing chores around the house because they're just used to it. I think anything that's encouraging us to be mindless is not going to be helpful long term. So instead, we could, if there's maybe music you like listen to or something that you can keep your mind activated and not numbing out. Like zoning out, I don't think is a healthy thing to pursue, And it could also just be like if you're doing chores, try to find the joy in those chores, which is hard to do, right? In a lot of chores. But like why do we do chores? Like why do we do laundry or wash dishes? And it sounds silly, but we do it not just because we want to, like, we need clean clothes and clean dishes, but again, why? Like, I need clean clothes because I'm a member of society. I want to be able to exist in society in a way that's helpful to others. And if I only have dirty clothes, then I'm not going to do that. People will look upon me and they'll have negative thoughts. So it's not about my ego, it's not about my pride, but it's about me recognizing this is an opportunity for me to be in concert with other people. So this is a necessary thing that I'm doing. And so I do that with a mind of joy and with a mind that says, I am working towards the liberation of sentient beings by doing these chores, And so be very mindful of the activities you're doing. But
then one can reduce it and just have it cut it out altogether, but not spend like hours and hours.
I think one of the advice I was given when I first came to the monastery is I wasn't given, another monk was given, another Westerner. His teacher, you're told not to numb out, not to zone out. And so we had a habit, a lot of us do, like turning on music and using it as a way to zone out and de-stress and not thinking about whatever emotional responses you're getting to the music, not analyzing how you feel, but just like zoning it, right? Using it to numb yourself. And our teacher said, sometimes it's okay to do that once in a while. It's not ideal, but that's not the goal. You shouldn't have to do that. But you're a suffering sentient being. So sometimes if this is what you have to do because you've been doing it for so long, then do it, but realize this isn't the best practice. But right now, this is what I have. And I know that if I do this for the next 20 minutes, it'll give me the resources I need to then do something else. And then you say, okay, and maybe in a year, I won't have to do this. But right now, this is where I am. So as Shanti said, try to reduce it. And don't, even if you're using entertainment as a way to numb yourself or to be mindless, don't be mindless about that decision. Be aware that, okay, this is not a best practice, but in my temporary situation is going to help. So that's something you can do. There are also ways to, I think, consume entertainment, even true crime entertainment or whatever it may be, in a mindful way. It is possible. It's hard because it stirs up your emotions, but it's possible. I remember when Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe first came to the US for their first tour of the US, they were in California, and students wanted to bring Lama to the movies. And he was like, I can't go to the movies, I don't have time. But Rinpoche will go. And Rinpoche didn't want to go, but Lama told me he had to, so Rinpoche had no choice. And he said, okay, I'll go. But whatever we go to the movies to see, it has to have a lot of suffering so we can have something to meditate on. Right? But so he said, okay, this is obviously something we can do. I can use this as a way to encourage my practice, right? So it's possible. I think we have the habit of being mindless about things. We can engage in things in a meaningful way. And I think art in general is a really important way to understand how we live in the world, you know? And that might be art like TV shows or art like, visual arts, all different art. I think art is a really powerful way to understand our place in the world. So I don't think we should get rid of them, but we have to be mindful when we consume them. But I think it's important to realize, in general, even people that say they want to be calm, they want to be content, still seek out excitement. And they still prioritize worldly excitement over spiritual contentment. You know, even I'll say I'm to blame for this as well. Whenever I go to the US, which is, maybe once a year or twice every couple of 3 years or so, around that, the Dharma center I'm most affiliated with, Kurukula Center, they have pujas at least 4 times a month. And they have classes twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. And I very rarely attend them because, my family lives about an hour away from there. So I have to borrow a car, I have to drive for an hour and then attend this thing. I won't get home till 10 p.m. I'm only home in the US for a week or 2 weeks or something like that. And so I prioritize other things than these Dharma practices, which are so meaningful to my life. So I do that too. We all do it. We all say, I have so many things I have to do. I can't go to the Dharma center today. I have all these errands I have to run. I have family I have to go see. And sometimes, due to our circumstances, we have obligations we can't get out of, right? Especially you're living their lives, you have families, you have jobs. There are things that you can't get out of. You have responsibilities, unlike me, who has very few responsibilities. So sometimes that's true. But sometimes we just say those things and they're not really true, right? Sometimes we can rearrange things, but we say, oh, going to the Dharma Center for 2 hours, it's kind of, a little bit of a drag. More exciting to go do this other thing, right? That's fine. We have that experience. I know I'm definitely a drag a lot. I know. We're human beings who are suffering. We have to do the best we can do, right? But I think it's important that we do our best to be aware whenever we are seeking out excitement instead of contentment. That's our habit. And if we can become aware of it, then we can reduce it. Because we can realize that the true sense of happiness comes from spiritual practice. And hopefully being here at the Dharma Center or being on your cushion at home or wherever you practice is going to build your experience and your relationship with contentment so it becomes your second nature. Because the more you practice, the stronger you are at avoiding self-cherishing minds. And the stronger you are at recognizing them when they are infiltrating your experience and getting rid of them, then the more content you are all the time, right? So contentment doesn't only exist when you're meditating or when you're in a Dharma center. What we're doing is creating a way to live in the world. And we use this opportunity to build up our mental resources so we can go face difficult circumstances with open, happy, content minds. We can face obstacles and not be overridden by anxiety, but say, okay, how do I deal with this in the most meaningful way? To some extent, the way we think about things predicts the results we're going to have. So if I say, oh, I have to go to this other puja, okay, fine. And it's the same for me at the center, at the monastery, we have pujas and they're often at 5:30 in the morning, our morning pujas, and you're like, oh, okay, another puja, fine. If that's your attitude going into the puja, you're not going to get a lot out of it, right? You're just going to show up to make sure you're there. You're a warm body. You're not doing any transformation of your mind. And I know that happens to me all the time. You're like, oh, fine. Or you're like, especially when they do 3 pujas in a row, you're like, okay, it's our 1 day off, and you're giving us pujas from 5 a.m. to 1 in the afternoon. Thanks, great. And you have that attitude, you're not going to get any benefit at all, right? And there's actually just a recent scientific study that showed this. They did fMRI studies. And I guess I'm not the kind of person that really cares. I'm not as obsessed with science having verifiable scientific facts prove Buddhist suppositions. Like that's not my main interest, but every once in a while it is interesting. It just was a study, and what they did was they had people in full body fMRI machines. So they're checking their brainwaves, and they were giving them something to drink, and it was either water or something that was a little bit mild spicy or extra spicy. One of those three options. And they weren't lying to them. They knew what was going to be. So the first case they did was they didn't tell them what was coming. They just gave it. And they registered if they liked it or didn't like it, right? And then you had people that said they enjoyed the spicy flavor and they didn't enjoy it. And they measured their brainwaves. But then the next time around, they told them what was coming. Okay, this is just water. This is mild. This is extra spicy. And the people that enjoyed the spicy flavor, when they knew it was going to be spicy before they got it, they reacted more strongly. And the people that didn't like spicy, when they knew it was coming, they also reacted more strongly. So it didn't change the way they reacted, whether it was negative or positive, due to their pre-existing like or dislike. But what it did is it made their reaction stronger, the anticipation. So something about that anticipation that strengthened their reaction. And they were able to measure this in their brainwaves, right? They didn't try lying to them and saying you're going to get spicy and giving them mild. They didn't try that in the experiment. All they were doing is to see if you being aware of something before it happened, if it changes the way you experience it. And they showed, at least in this test, that it did. That you're being aware of something is predisposing you to something. That predisposition makes your experience stronger in both directions, negative and positive, right? So that goes to the very beginning when I said we need to set an intention. We start our practice by setting an intention, right? We start our practice together by setting an intention. And it's something we should do all the time. When we wake up in the morning, say, okay, I lived another night. I'm awake, I'm alive today. I'm going to use my day to benefit sentient beings as best as I can. And that setting that intention throughout the day, checking in with ourselves, saying, do I still have this mindset that I'm trying to help others? Or have I fallen back into being self-cherishing, focusing only on myself? And if I have, then you reset your intention. Doing that throughout the day is really important because we are lining ourselves up. We are making ourselves predisposed towards contentment, towards happiness, be free from drama. Okay. It's 11:30. Let's do a brief meditation practice together, and then we'll take a short break, stretch our legs, and then we'll come back and we'll have some time to wrap up and do question and answers. Okay. So adopt a comfortable position, whatever it may be, whether if you're in a chair, allow your feet to both be flat on the ground and not crossed at the ankles or at the knees, but be flat. If you're sitting, whatever position is comfortable for you, that you feel balanced and secure and stable. That's the most important thing, that you're comfortable and stable. Allow your spine to be nice and straight. And of course, we know the spine is curved, but we can visualize it as being nice and straight. Lay your hands, you can either have them in a meditation mudra, which is the right hand on top of the left, with your thumbs just barely touching, your elbows out, and this resting at the level of your navel. Or you can simply let your hands rest on your thighs, wherever they naturally fall, whatever's more comfortable for you. Let your head rest on top of your spine naturally, following the curve of your upper spine. So you don't want to be tilting your head up or tucking your head down, but just let it follow this natural curve. Your jaw can be nice and loose. It'll hang open a little bit, and that's okay. Allow your tongue to rest on the roof of your mouth, behind your teeth, on your hard palate. This is a little awkward at first, but it is helpful to control your breathing and to make sure saliva doesn't pool in your mouth. So it's actually a very useful part of the posture. Lastly, try to keep your eyes at least halfway open. Let them be unfocused, following down the tip of your nose to the space, maybe a meter in front of you or so. Not focused on any one thing in particular, but they're open and aware of their environment. When we meditate, we're trying to wake up, so we don't want to fall asleep. So having open eyes, or half open eyes, is a useful part of that. And so we'll start the practice today with a simple mindfulness practice, because as we said, mindfulness is the basis of all of our practices. And so we'll begin just allowing our mind to follow the breath. So as you breathe in, you can be aware of the breath moving in your nostrils, filling your lungs. Then your chest lowers as the breath exits out your nostrils. Let your breathing fall into a natural rhythm. Don't force it, whatever your body is comfortable with. And allow your awareness to rest on the breath, on the breath. And if it's helpful, you can label breathing in, breathing out. And if that helps your mind stay focused. When you notice distractions arise, either external distractions from your sight, sound, or smell, or internal distractions, such as you find yourself lost in a daydream, recognize that. You can label it distraction, and then return your awareness to your breath. There's no need to judge your distractions as being good or bad, or to judge yourself for having those distractions. You just recognize them and then let them go and gently return your awareness to the object of your meditation. Now I want you to bring to mind some external circumstances where you feel anxiety or stress. It doesn't have to be something overwhelming or big. You can keep it nice and small. Maybe if you are worried about a performance review at work, or maybe you have a dinner with your in-laws or extended family. Maybe you're running late for a date with your friends. Any external circumstances where you feel stress or anxiety. Think of one and really allow that experience of anxiety or stress to come to your mind and look at how the external circumstances are precipitating it. Be aware of that experience, the relationship between that external circumstance and the mind of stress or anxiety that you experience as a result. So let's spend a few minutes bringing such an example to mind. Just think of one example, and if you start feeling overwhelmed by it, then let it go and return to your breath, okay? Now, as you examine this experience and the external factors that lead to it, I want you to really look deep and say, what is the actual cause of my anxiety in that situation? The external factors may be precipitating, but what is the actual cause? Is the actual cause that I'm worried that others will criticize me or think poorly of me? Is the cause I'm worried that I may not get a promotion and have some financial downfall? Is the cause that my story that I tell about myself and how I exist in the world is going to be challenged by others? External circumstances cause you anxiety. Now try to find the actual internal cause that is generating that feeling of anxiety or stress. As you're able to identify this internal cause, recognize that this cause is a tendril of the self-cherishing mind. We develop the conviction that this anxiety, this stress, is actually the result of my self-cherishing mind. It is not the fault of the external causes. So develop conviction in this. With this conviction, there should not be a sense of blame or frustration, but instead a sense of joy. If the cause of my anxiety is my self-cherishing mind, that is something I can control, even when I can't control the external circumstances. So as you develop confidence and conviction that your self-cherishing mind serves as the primary cause of your anxiety or stress, allow that conviction to be a source of joy for you. That conviction is conviction in your own power to change your circumstances. I have very little control over my external circumstances, but I have full control over my internal circumstances. And therefore, I find joy in this conviction that my suffering, my anxiety, is coming from my self-cherishing mind, because I have the tools to stop them. The antidote to the self-cherishing mind is a mind that cherishes others more than myself. So now we'll spend a few minutes thinking of the advantages of a mind that cherishes others more than myself. A mind that cherishes others is the source of all joy. The mind that cherishes others is what allows us to develop contentment easily and readily. A mind that cherishes others makes us attractive and appealing to others so that we might engage in harmonious relationships without effort. A mind that cherishes others serves as the strongest basis to live a life free of anxiety and stress, regardless of how difficult the external circumstances may be. Once we have some confidence in these benefits or advantages of the self-perishing mind, now we develop the aspiration that I will cultivate the mind that cherishes others more than myself. Now discard the mind that is the mind of self-cherishing. You can allow this aspiration to ride your breath even. So as you breathe in, you can say to yourself, I will cultivate the mind that cherishes others. And as you breathe out, I will discard the mind that cherishes myself. Then, as you're ready, you can allow your awareness to return to the room. Thank you. So you'll notice that the back half of that meditation took elements of the meditation to develop bodhicitta, right? We have the two techniques for developing bodhicitta, the sevenfold cause and effect, and then the exchanging self and others. Sevenfold cause and effect coming from Asanga, exchanging self and others coming from Shantideva. And then Tsongkhapa combining those two into one 11-point method, which involves meditating on the disadvantages of the self-cherishing mind, the advantages of the mind that cherishing others more than ourselves, and then the exchange of self and others, which is to say, replacing the self-cherishing mind with the mind that cherishes others. So we took those parts of that meditation, but we focused them first. First, we set a calm mind, right? As we said, mindfulness is critical to allow us to be aware of what's going on inside. And then we looked at this emotional experience of stress or anxiety that we don't want to pervade our lives. So we allowed ourselves to experience this harmful thing that we want to get rid of, right? Because we don't want it to be just intellectual. We want to know what it is we're trying to avoid. But then we looked at both the prima facie causes, the external causes that we usually blame for our stress and anxiety, and then took one look deeper to see what is the internal cause. So we're going about this intellectual process, right? Meditation is an intellectual process. So you combine your wisdom with your practice. And then once you do that and you see how the self-cherishing mind is usually at the heart of all of our distress, then the reason that's useful is because it creates the familiarity. When you have a moment of stress in your life, you'll develop the familiarity that says, wait, this isn't due to this external circumstance. It's due to me. And that means I can do something about it, right? So we slowly build up that recognition in our meditation practice. And the more we build it up, then when we're going about our everyday lives, it comes more quickly. So that's the reason we do it this way. We go step by step. And sometimes those steps seem almost didactic, right? Like very detailed, but it's useful for us because we've lived our lives in such levels of ignorance and following emotions blindly that taking the time to go through things slowly is useful. I know for me, a meditation like this, I get really stressed out being late for things. Really, I don't like being late, which is interesting living in India because nothing starts on time. I'm much better at other people being late though than me. And I know I could tell you from a point of view of childhood trauma and psychological development, why that is. It has to do with I grew up in an environment where my mother was working 2 or 3 jobs at a time, single mother, 80 to 100 hours a week. But that meant I was always late wherever I was going because she never was able to leave on time. And I was the last one to be picked up from any activity I was doing. And so they were always the teacher or the counselor, whatever it was, waiting for my mother to come get me so they could finally leave. And so because of that, I have this anxiety about being late. I really, really dislike. I'll be everywhere. I'm going to be there 15 minutes early instead of being late. And that's useful in the jobs I've done because my jobs require me to be there on time, right? But that's not where the source of my stress. As much as I would love to say the source of my anxiety is because I don't want to put others out. I don't want to discomfort others. That's true. The real source is I feel stressed out that people look at me and judge me as being a bad person for being late, or they judge my family or whatever it may be, right? So that's my experience. That's one of the, and I still, I've been practicing for decades. I get stressed out. So for me, looking at that, when I'm running late for something, because inevitably I run late for things, I can look at that stress and say, okay, the stress isn't coming from me wanting, from the circumstance, but it's coming from me not wanting others to think poorly of me, worrying that my reputation is going to be harmed because of it. And so even if that's true, even if my reputation is going to be harmed for being late, that is not a proper motivation for me to engage in something, right? That's not the way I should go about living my life. So what that can help me do is relieve that stress. Doesn't mean I'm going to be late for things. I'm still going to do my best to be on time because I think that's respectful to others just in my circumstance. But it's going to eliminate that sense of distress and anxiety, right? And I can replace it with saying, my real goal is to serve others. So I want to be respectful of their time. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. So then I can have the external circumstances the same, where I am doing my best to be on time or early for things, but not because I want to be looked upon as a good person, but because I want them to feel that they're respected and comforted and being beneficial to them. So my external behavior isn't changing, but my mind is changing, right? So instead of doing something that's encouraging my self-cherishing mind, I'm encouraging the mind that cherishes others. And so doing this practice on my own, when I'm not in that circumstance, gives me the familiarity. So then when I notice myself overwhelmed, I can say, wait, let me just rearrange my thinking about this, right? Then I can relieve my distress and I can focus on others at the same time and make this, running to catch a rickshaw, positive spiritual practice instead of a blind self-cherishing practice, okay? So that's why these things are useful, at least for me. And that's why I think these practices, like I was saying, we need to develop practices that work in the long-term scale. So practices that slowly familiarize our minds with the Dharma, and then develop ways to implement them in short term to overcome the immediate obstacles we're facing. So let's take a break there. Are there any immediate questions? Okay, let's take a break there. Let's stretch our legs, get some tea, coffee. I think there's some snacks. We'll come back in 15 minutes. And so we can do a little wrap up and have some more time for questions then. Okay? Great, thank you. Now that we've been watered and walked, we can continue. I think one of the most difficult things about understanding these teachings and practicing them right now is that it feels, I'll speak for myself, it feels like I'm not doing enough, right? We see so much injustice happening in the world, and a lot of it is out of our control in a meaningful way, but we feel like we should be doing something. And to do only this inner work feels like it isn't enough, like it's paltry in compared to the injustice and the suffering that's happening. So I have that sensation. And it's exacerbated by living at a monastery where everything is taken care of for me, right? I have very favorable circumstances where the rest of my family, for instance, is living, in the middle of everything going on in the States and my friends. So I think this feeling is common. I think part of the reason it comes, though, is we undervalue the importance of this internal work. I think that's the starting place. We instinctively undervalue the internal work because it's hard to measure and because it's hard to accept that the way we can be of best service to others is by, to use kind of like lingo, to optimizing ourselves first. Right? It's hard to accept that in a meaningful way. So I can appreciate that when you say, okay, it seems like everything is burning down. What do you need to do? Oh, focus on your mind. That doesn't seem sufficient. Okay. And I'll say the truth is, depending on your circumstances, it may not be sufficient. But we have to be realistic about what we are able to do. Like, I'm not a political strategist. I look at what's happening in politics right now. I have no clue what can actually affect meaningful change in the political environment, aside from contacting my representatives, making my displeasure known, voting when it's time to vote. Other than that, I don't have any knowledge how to engage in political change, right? But I do know that anything I'm going to do, whether it be at the level of engaging in politics or at the community level or the family level, interrelationship level, it needs to be based on a firm foundation. And that foundation has to be one of love and compassion and understanding my own mind. Right? I know that. I know it intellectually. Doesn't always feel fulfilling because I want to be making radical change in the world. But I know that that change has to come from my mind first. So even though it's not fulfilling, I have to start with myself. And then I have the opportunity to analyze, what can I do? Do I have the opportunity to be helpful to others in an external way? Due to my circumstances, due to my skills, my technique, my skills, my intellect, whatever I'm skilled, whatever I'm privileges I have, whatever it may be, is there something I can do? But instead of lashing out blindly, I'll use some level of introspection and be honest with myself. So Buddhism does call upon us, or I'll say our spiritual journey does call upon us to serve others in any way that we're capable of doing it. But in order to do that in a meaningful way, we have to take care of our minds first. And that means when we face difficult circumstances, when we face obstacles, we have to learn how to see those external obstacles as part of our path of practice and how to adopt them into our practice. Right? And so that's not the same thing as being passive and just letting bad things happen. And it's not the same thing as being defeatist, as saying things are going to happen, I'm just going to ignore it and create a bubble for myself, right? It's not giving up. What it's doing is recognizing that there's only so much control I have over the external things in the world. And the only way I can gain more control of those things is by developing my mind. So when I'm faced with obstacles, whether they be small, inconvenient obstacles to my life, or these like incredibly large obstacles that many of us are facing, I'm not just giving up and saying, okay, that's the way it is, I can't control it. I'm saying this is an opportunity to see how my mind reacts to this, develop a mind of compassion and a mind of bodhicitta, a mind that cherishes others, and a mind that is infused with wisdom, realizing how I exist in the world. And from that place, then I can say, what can I do? Is there something I can do? Maybe it's just donating money to a cause that is useful. Maybe it is doing something else. Maybe it's having private conversations with friends and family. It's not going to look the same for everyone, but until we do the work, we'll have no clue what that is. We'll just be lashing out blindly, sometimes being helpful, sometimes not being helpful, right? So it's a hard thing to accept for me, but I have to have confidence that the inner work is most important. And I have that confidence through my experience. I know when I take the time to analyze my actions, to see why I'm reacting to something, and instead of reacting blindly, to engage in constructive action, that it's more beneficial in the long run, both for myself and others. I know that only because I've taken the time to try to do that work and to see it and to experience it. So I have to rely upon my experiences in small ways to trust that the bigger picture is the same. And to some extent, in our practice, and I hate saying this, but it comes down to mindfulness at its heart. And I hate saying that simply because, at least in the West, whenever you tell someone you're a Buddhist, you're like people that say, oh, I'm a Buddhist too. I do mindfulness meditation. And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't make you a Buddhist. It's like every culture has mindfulness meditation. But the truth is, it's critical. It's a linchpin. We spend so much of our time not being mindful of how we exist in the world, of how we're blindly reacting, how we're letting our emotions control us. That developing mindfulness is the foundation we need in order to then do any sort of investigative work on our minds. It's really important. It's important for our entire spiritual practice. If you want to do any advanced practices of, let's say, advanced practices of developing compassion or bodhicitta, you have to have a calm mind to do them. And then if you want to do even more advanced practices like Tantra, you have to have a calm mind. How can you visualize yourself as a Buddha if you aren't able to even calm your mind so that you have control over it, right? I was once, when I was over, I had a long life puja in Singapore in 2016, I believe. I was there, and a bunch of the Sangha went on a animal liberation practice. So we bought like a bunch of fish and went out on a boat to release them. So there was maybe 24 Sangha members or so. And at some point we were waiting. We were like sitting in a place having tea or coffee, waiting to go to the next step. And there was a young nun there. And I was sitting with Venerable Joan. I don't know if any of you know Venerable Joan. She is at Kopan most of the time, a long-term student of Lamsa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe. And she and I were sitting together, and there was this new nun, a fresh nun. And I don't know how I came up, but this nun said something to the extent of, well, I don't practice mindfulness meditation anymore because I practice Tantra. And both Joan and I looked at each other and we said, what? She goes, yeah, I don't have to do shamatha practice because I do have a Tantra practice instead. And we just said, okay. And then I said, you know what, Joan, I'm going to let you handle this one because I don't want to, overstep my place, especially being a monk and a man. But the idea that you don't need mindfulness practice because you engage in Tantra practice means you have no clue what Tantra practice is, right? The basis of it is having a mind that is secure and having a mind that's malleable, that you can control. So all the most advanced practices you could think of have mindfulness at their core. And so that's why it's so important in the way we deal with the world, in the way we look at our minds that are filled with anxiety and stress or dissatisfaction, and realize that if we want to relieve ourselves of those things, we have to recognize their actual causes, not just the external factors. And to recognize their actual causes, we have to have a mind that is calm and is stable, that allows us to investigate what's going on. Right? So mindfulness is key. And mindfulness is something we can do, we can practice, we can cultivate, we can strengthen all the time. Right? Even if you don't have time throughout the day to go and sit and do meditation, you could take a minute and a half to do a minute and a half of mindfulness, which seems like nothing. It seems paltry, right? But if you are running around all day, if you're busy, you have all these expectations for work, to take even a minute out of your time, never mind 5 minutes if you can find that, to actually focus on your mind is a huge difference, right? So you can do small things throughout your day to develop mindfulness. And so obviously our most common mindfulness practice is focusing on the breath or focusing on an image of Shakyamuni Buddha, a visualization of Shakyamuni Buddha. Those are the two most common, but there are a lot of other techniques for developing mindfulness. And so you see in other traditions, people doing things like mindful eating and mindful walking and mindful chores, that whatever you're doing, do them with a mind that is focusing on every detail of how you do it. So don't allow your mind to be distracted, whatever it is. If you're eating something, allow yourself to experience every physical sensation of that thing. Allow yourself to know every smell of it, the sensation of eating it, every texture. Allow yourself to just focus on that object of meditation, right? Because what you're doing is you're training your mind to go where you want it to go, when you want it to go there. That's the point of mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't a result, it's a tool, right? So that's the difference, is that mindfulness itself isn't the end goal. It's merely the tool we use to develop insight and then to transform the way we engage in the world. So if we want to develop conviction in this, we have to think of the ways that mindfulness subverts our self-cherishing mind. And it's because our self-cherishing mind is this mindless habit we've been following, right, for so many lifetimes. The 8 worldly dharmas: gain and loss, comfort, discomfort, compliments and criticism, popularity and infamy, or bad reputation. These 8 things that we're either seeking or seeking to avoid, they infiltrate so much of our mental space and our physical activities as well. And we do that without realizing. So mindfulness is giving us the opportunity to be aware of those things. And by being aware of them, we can subvert them. And then we can find a mind of contentment, a mind that realizes others' happiness is more important than our own. And therefore, we can find contentment. And so when difficulties arise, we say, what is this difficulty causing me a problem for? Is it causing me a problem that's actually preventing me from helping others? Or is it causing my ego a problem? Is it causing a problem for my sense of reputation or for my personal comfort? What is the problem being caused? Our egos are so strong that anytime any obstacle comes up, we think, me, this is hurting me, right? But what me is being hurt? What me is experiencing anxiety or happiness? What me am I grasping onto is being the center of the world. And how can I let go of that in such a way to allow myself more freedom? Because that's the point of all this. The point of all this practice is to find freedom, right? So as I said in the beginning, what do we mean by happiness? And we had some good definitions of it: being free from anxiety and stress, being free from doubt. Happiness is finding a sense of contentment regardless of your external circumstances. Happiness is allowing yourself to find pleasure, a mind of pleasure, not the pleasure of the sense organs, but a mental type of pleasure, regardless of the circumstances that are happening. That's not ignoring them. That's not saying bad things are happening, but I'm happy, so nothing matters. That's not ignoring the outside world, but it's saying that I'm not going to let outside circumstances dictate my happiness or my suffering. I'm going to experience whatever I have to experience. It may be physically unpleasant and may be difficult. That's out of my control. I can control how I react to it, right? And in that control is a freedom. That's what we're looking for, that freedom. And it takes a long time to build it up because we're so used to blaming our happiness and our suffering on forces outside of ourselves. That's our instinct. Right? When you give me a nice present, that makes me happy. When you take something away from me, that makes me unhappy. We're so used to it. Okay? So it takes a lot of work to subvert that. To realize that we have the freedom and the power to define our own happiness and suffering. We don't have the freedom and power to affect the outside world for every aspect it plays or it affects our lives, but we control our reaction to it. And that reaction, if we want to find that freedom, it comes from looking at developing mindfulness and looking at our self-cherishing mind and not blaming ourselves. That's the critical thing. I'm really good at blaming myself. Whenever I realize that I'm doing something that's causing myself anxiety, I say, God, you're so stupid. You should know better. You've been practicing for 2 decades. What is wrong with you? That's not helpful though, right? That's not helpful at all. We don't blame ourselves because we are suffering sentient beings doing the best we can. If I have to turn on music for a half hour and zone out because I can't deal with anything else right now, and when I try to meditate, my mind's running in circles. If I have to do that, you know what? I have to do that sometimes. I'm not a perfect being. So we can accept that and say, this isn't ideal. I wish I didn't have to do this, but I know myself. And so maybe next time I'll try something else, but right now I need this. So we give ourselves grace to realize we're suffering sentient beings doing the best we can. We don't blame ourselves, but we recognize that we are the ones in control, ultimately. And so we have to try to grab onto that control. Yeah.
So when I do something like this, then there's a part of me like, say, I'll listen to or not do this activity because it's stressing me out. The part of me says, see, you're getting out of doing it. See, you're making excuses not to do it. So I also need to develop the confidence in myself that if I am turning on music or whatever, taking time out from doing something stressful, I need to believe that I'm doing it not because the self-blaming part of me is already judging even that action and saying it's, you're no good. You're just finding ways to not do it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true. It's a balance, right? Because it is true. We have to find that balance to not give in to indulge our self-cherishing mind all the time. But at the same time, recognize that we've had these bad habits for so long that we can't expect them to be gone overnight, right? So we have to just give ourselves enough grace, but also be honest with ourselves, be firm with ourselves, saying, okay, I'm going to try to meditate for 10 minutes. And then if my mind is still all over the place, then I'll listen to music for 10 minutes or whatever, So we push ourselves. We're not giving in. We're not letting ourselves be indulgent, but we're recognizing that I have work to do, and this is something I can use right now. So we have to find the balance, and it's hard. But we have to, no matter what it is, blaming ourselves isn't useful, right? Being honest with ourselves and saying, I'm creating the suffering for myself. That's an honesty that's useful. But then saying you're a bad person because you're doing it, that's not useful, right? So that's like the difference between, in Buddhism, we talk about the importance of having shame and embarrassment. Those are two virtuous minds. So shame being whenever you realize you're engaging in non-virtuous action and you develop an awareness of that and the wish not to do it, but you're not being viewed by anyone else, but you still have that mind, that's shame. And embarrassment is when you are in the presence of other people and are engaging in something unvirtuous and you are like, repelled by your own unvirtuous action and you develop the wish not to do it. So we think shame and embarrassment are useful, but because they're not judging you as being a good or bad person, we're looking at your action and saying this isn't a healthy action and developing a mind that wants to counteract that. So it's not the same as guilt that says you're a bad person for doing this bad. Right? So when I notice that I'm not living up to the Bodhisattva ideal, I recognize that. I don't try to pretend, oh, no, I really am. This is, I don't try to be dishonest with myself, but I also am not saying, well, I'm a bad person because I'm, right? So finding that balance is critical and recognizing that sometimes we need to have grace with ourselves because we're not perfect beings. We're on the way to become Buddhists, but it's a journey, right? And so we have to see where we are. Any other, maybe some questions? Yeah.
Another question I'm hesitating to ask because I think I'll be playing around. I'm slightly struggling to right now see clarity in how to relate everything we've discussed, and especially the short-term and long-term strategies and just giving ourselves grace with the impact in sleep on my mindfulness during practice and during the day. So I'll say an example. I've observed that if I sleep less, not because like partying the whole night, but do these days and instead of 8 hours, I sleep 6 hours. And the next day, or especially if it's 2 days in a row, both during meditation, I struggle with focus, and during the whole day also my mindfulness goes down. And then also irritability goes up, and the ability to self-regulate goes down, and then the need for numbing goes up, and the whole spiral. And then that also means that if I know in advance that I won't be able to sleep enough, I freak out in advance. I know like, okay, this means that the day after, I will be more likely to engage in non-virtue, the practice will suck, this, that, all that. Yeah, and so I'm not sure what to think about it. Like, am I actually like, is it actually a biological need, or is it like a variation of attachment to comfort that it's just like my own projection that I actually with the whole like bird effect, right? Like maybe I actually don't need it. And then there's the example of Lama Zopa not sleeping at all. I'm a bit confused about
Yeah.
what
So
to do about that.
I mean, Lama Zopa achieved the city. He achieved, I think it is as long as we are ordinary sentient beings, taking good care of our bodies is critical. And we know there's a relationship between our minds and our bodies, right? And the way it's talked about most often in the teachings is we look at the relationship between a horse and its rider, right? That the horse has to be healthy and in good shape. Otherwise, the rider isn't going to be on a comfortable ride. And the rider has control over the horse. But if the horse throws the rider off, there's nothing the rider can do. So we have to take care of our bodies in that. And now different people need different amounts of sleep just due to our biology. And we can't. I believe in the power of our mind, that our mind has the capacity to become infinite, or we have infinite capacity to become Buddhas and become perfected beings. I do believe that in this life. And so I believe our mind can overcome many, many things, including biological deficiencies, including psychological disorders. I do. I think we have the capacity, but that's a long way off, right? That we need to do a lot of practice before we can do that. Most of us can't meditate the depression away. Like that's not possible. Okay. And so it's very harmful when people say that you should be able to overcome it because your mind is infinite. So we have to use whatever resources we have. So if you know that you need 8 hours of sleep, which is most people do, the most studies are showing this idea that adults don't need it are probably flawed studies, right? That almost all people need, young children, and when they're developing, they need anywhere from 8 to 11 hours of sleep sometimes, and adults need anywhere from 7 to 9, and that is not uncommon. So if you know that if I don't get the sleep, it's going to affect everything about how I exist in the world the next few days, then you prioritize trying to live a life that allows that. And then if you get in a situation where you aren't able to, due to whatever circumstances, it's good to develop techniques to then try to overcome it. So if you know, if I don't get enough sleep today, I'm going to be very irritable tomorrow, try to develop mindfulness techniques that can be more aware of that irritability and focus on it so you can overcome more easily, But I don't think we can just dismiss the needs of our biological needs because we don't, someone like Lama Zopa, he had achieved in a past life the ability to not need sleep anymore due to his meditation practice. But that was like years of meditation practice that allowed him to develop that. It wasn't just, it wasn't just sitting on a cushion for a little while. So we look at them as inspiration and we look at them as examples of what is possible in this life. But that's not going to happen for us tomorrow. That should guide us to be inspired to practice more because there's that potential in all of us. But we also have to be realistic. So I think taking care of your body is important. And I know I'm not good enough at doing it. I don't exercise enough. I don't do a lot of the things I should because I have so many things going on at the monastery and things like that. And so it's something I think all of us can benefit from remembering that having healthy minds at this point in our practice depends on having healthy bodies. And so if you know that certain practices are going to affect your mind, then, like you said, if I know that by not getting enough sleep, I'm going to be more distracted. I'm going to be more irritable. I'm going to, be less mindful. Then try to develop habits where if you know that's going to be the case, what can I do to circumvent that? You know what I mean? And so how can I change my daily routine, being aware that this is hard for me? And it's the same for like, if you know, as an example, like say that this is something we just came across in America for holidays. If you know that you have a hard time being around your extended family, right? And you have to go see and it's all the extended family, you know that they're going to push all of your buttons, they're going to do everything to get you angry. You know that. You go into that environment knowing, okay, these are the obstacles that are going to come up. How do I have to hold myself differently to not let those obstacles trigger me, right? So you know that. So you try to take some precautionary measures because the environment is different. So it's the same thing. If you know that, okay, I haven't gotten enough sleep or enough rest, or I've eaten really poorly the last couple of days, and as a result of that, I'm going to be irritable, I'm going to be quick, have a short temper, I'm going to do these things, then what can I change about my daily routine to try to balance out that? But I don't know if that helps. But I think it's an accurate thing. And I think the belief that we can it's laziness on our part to say, I shouldn't need 8 hours sleep or whatever it is, and therefore it's my own fault. I think that is putting too much pressure on ourselves and on our practice. Yeah.
Could I share?
Sure.
So
we're already we're already at 12:35. So please share, and we'll have room for questions. But
sorry, I don't need.
No, please.
Okay. So I had this experience where I went through a phase where if I slept anything less than 8 hours, I would think, oh, my day is gone. Now it's going to be a hard day. I'm going to be struggling. And then I don't know. I think I also read or heard about Lama Zopa Rinpoche not needing sleep at all. And I don't know if that was an inspiration or what. But I slowly have changed to saying something like, if I don't get 8 hours of sleep, let me see how the day goes. And I find, and I've been doing this for some time now, I find that when I've changed my mind somewhat, I find that I am able to, it's not that I aim to get less hours of sleep, but sometimes it just happens that I sleep late, I have to get up early. Like last night, I've got about 6 hours of sleep. But I know I'm fine. And I know also that I've stopped thinking, oh, this day is gone. Because earlier I would think that, oh, this day is gone. It's going to be a hard day.
And this goes to what we were saying is that we create, like we project our reality to some extent. So if you say, this is going to be an awful day because I don't have enough sleep and everything is going to go wrong, then you're going to probably have an awful day. If you say, okay, I'm going to have more obstacles today because my body is catching up from sleep, but that's not going to dictate my mental well-being, then that's how you face the day, you know? So as you're saying, like we project the reality that we live in to some extent, or not project, we create the environment to some extent by the power of our minds.
There's a question online.
Okay.
Monica is asking, what is your opinion on somatic body work practice for anxiety?
I don't have any direct experience with it. I know that we hold a lot of our anxiety in our body in certain ways. And so I think any technique from the outside that is helpful, then we should adopt it. I think ultimately our anxiety and our stress and our sense of discomfort comes from minds that we create. And therefore we do have the ability to overcome them mentally. But if there's any tool or technique that can help that and make it easier, then we should adopt it. So if there's, I don't know the specific somatic work that she's referencing, but if even going and getting a massage or doing other types of somatic work is able to make our body less stressed so we can release some of that stress, then I think that's a great thing to practice. Just recognizing that that isn't the only answer. That is one tool that then can allow our mind more space to move, right? So you
can break the habit, it cuts the one link in the chain.
Yeah, exactly. Any tools we have any resources or tools we have available, we should use. You know, whether they be, that's why I think having modern psychotherapy and going to see a therapist, I think is incredibly important for many of us, and it is complementary to a spiritual practice. It is not in place of a spiritual practice, but it's not discordant with the spiritual practice. The same goes for doing body work, for doing massage work, for doing yoga, for doing exercise work. These all can be complementary to our spiritual practice because what they're doing is using tools and techniques and things that are available to us to give our minds more space to do the work, right? So that's the goal. Okay, I think we'll end there. That's okay. Let us close with some prayers. So we recognize that we set a strong motivation in the beginning of our session today. And by doing that, we created virtue in the beginning. And then by contemplating the Dharma and by engaging in Dharma practice, we created virtue in the middle. And now to seal our practice with virtue at the end, we dedicate it. So what we mean by that is we recognize that we have accumulated some positive karma, some merit through our practice today. And instead of wanting to keep that merit for ourselves, we dedicate it to all other things. We develop the mind that wishes we can give away all of that virtue, that it may ripen on others, that they may be relieved of their suffering, for those who are sick, for those who are unwell, that they may be freed from their sickness, and they might find contentment. For those who have passed away, they may quickly find positive rebirth when they may meet with a Mahayana virtuous friend. For those who have obstacles, may those obstacles be cleared from their mind. So any merit we've accumulated, we wish that it can be ripened on others and give it away instead of holding on to it for ourselves. So develop a mind that first recognizes you've created merit through your practice today, has a moment of rejoicing in that merit, and then instead of grasping onto it, lets that merit go and wishes that it can ripen on others. And so we'll go to page 36 and we'll recite the 2 dedication verses. And then we'll also recite the long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai. And we'll recite all of those in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning. I'm very happy to have you here, both in person and online. I'm happy to be starting this new series for the next couple months. So the schedule is we have one weekend off, the weekend of Holy, because Holy is on the 14th on Friday. And we anticipate people will want a 3-day weekend. So we're not going to force you to choose between your 3-day weekend and coming to the center. But other than that, all the weekends from now until the end of April, we'll have sessions. Either myself or Venmo Keldama. Some of them will be online, but we're going to try to do most of them in person if we can. So you can expect that for the next 2 months. That's all we have scheduled so far. And then we'll be starting the program at the monasteries. So then we're going to have to, the next program we'll figure afterwards. We're a little bit out of time. So we'll be here. And if there are any specific topics, like we said, with Sunday mornings especially, where we want to leave them open. So everyone is invited, regardless of your level of experience. And if there are specific things you'd like us to talk about, how Buddhism can be useful in your life, and practical utility for practice, then you can share them either with us or with Shantila or Diti when she's here, and then they can tell us, and so we can incorporate those into the teachings as well. Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
so offering also next week. Next
Oh,
weekend.
okay. On the 8th, Saturday. Okay. So there's a puja. Okay. Okay. There may be a puja happening next weekend as well. We'll check your notifications for it. Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. Happy to do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
For telling you
Thank you.
today.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.